Well, hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Labor Day, September 5th, and here's some of what we're talking about tonight. Can justice and mercy coexist in our correction system? You'll meet a man who was granted clemency after serving nearly 20 years in prison. But getting out is just the first challenge. Expunging a criminal record is a whole other obstacle. More on how that's done is just ahead. Reproductive rights are not only a concern for cisgender women, they're also a major issue for the transgender and non-binary communities. We'll explain. Also, it's back to school time, and that means it's time for active shooter drills. But the guidance in these drills is evolving. Ken Delanian shows us how. And how do we help each other through these emotional times if we can't even understand each other's emotions? Best-selling author Brené Brown joins us with tips from her book, Atlas of the Heart. Let's begin tonight with mercy in the criminal justice system. Presidents have the power to pardon convictions or commute federal sentences. Both fall under the process of clemency. One man spent almost 2 decades in prison before his petition was granted, and now he wants to help others get a second chance at freedom. One of the first things he did when he got out was buy a Harley.
When I got out of prison, all I had was a stack of legal papers and a sweatsuit. My daughter handed me a flat thing as we were leaving the prison, and I didn't know other than to just put it in my lap. And she says, well, go ahead and talk. And I said, we are talking. And she had to tell me that is a telephone. A telephone didn't look like that in 2002 when I was arrested. A lot of friends of mine knew that I loved to ride a motorcycle, so they all started reaching out to everybody they knew to see if they could find a deal on a motorcycle that I could afford.
He's been incarcerated for 20 years, and he went on a cross-country trip. He went to hug all of his supporters.
I got to ride the whole length of Route 66 from here in Chicago all the way to Barstow, California. I rode across deserts, mountains. I rode 300 miles down the Pacific Coast Highway in the Big Sur. I rode over mountains in Washington State that unfortunately I found they had snow at the top. And, I rode through Yellowstone. I rode through the whole west of the United States. It was beautiful.
Craig was the second prisoner I ever worked with. I was a writer who was writing about cannabis, and like most people, I was unaware there were people serving life sentences for marijuana, and that just haunted me. I couldn't not do something about it. It's comfortable to think that people like Craig were anomalies, maybe those 1 or 2 poor souls that got caught in the wheels of justice, but what I learned is it's not an anomaly, it's the way things are regularly done.
The name of the federal charge was conspiring to possess with the intent to distribute marijuana. In my case, it carried a sentence of from 0 to life imprisonment. And since the discretion is up to the judge, although I had no prior convictions and nobody was hurt, I was nevertheless sentenced to life imprisonment. The statute that I'm charged under and the sentence that I have is exactly the same as that of El Chapo Guzman, the head of the Sinaloa cartel.
Craig's was really one of the most egregious stories for a few reasons. He didn't use marijuana. He was never caught with marijuana. He was a third-party vendor.
All I see is memories here of all the work I did here and all the years that my business has operated out of here. Well, the name of my original business was Cabin Back Pickup Truck Camper Tops. And we built camper tops for the back of pickups. But unfortunately, I did some work directly for a company that leased trailers. And this company would take the trailers down to Mexico, hollow out the lot walls, fill the walls with marijuana, drive those trucks through the Border Patrol. I didn't know what they were doing. They drove the trucks all the way up here 1,000 or so miles away for me to rebuild them back to their original shape. They saw my participation in their offense by rebuilding the trailers when they were done with them. They saw that as me agreeing to their trafficking of marijuana. I was imprisoned from March 23rd, 2002 so just shy of 19 years. The way a federal life sentence works, there is no possibility of parole, there is no early release. But many of the violent prisoners, bank robbers and that sort, were serving 3 and 4 and 5 year sentences. A person that murdered people, he came in a year after me and he went home 3 years ago.
Marijuana fans are celebrating in Denver, with voters in Colorado and Washington state the first ever to make it legal for adults to possess and sell small amounts of pot for recreational use.
And I started this over 10 years ago. They would watch stories on the news about cannabis legalization. I would send photos because we would have a booth at events like the High Times Cannabis Cup, and they were all very hopeful because they were sure help was on the way. It has to be, and now a decade later, they're more feeling like they've been totally forgotten.
Under President Obama, he did a special initiative called the Clemency Project, and I went fully through that program. His last year in office, I was denied clemency. I'd actually tried under President Bush in 2008, I believe. That one was denied rather quickly. I was released from prison on January 20th, 2021, President Trump's last half day in office.
And it was to the last minute. I mean, Craig had already gone to bed. He didn't think it was going to happen.
At 5 minutes after midnight, I talked on the phone with Ivanka Trump, and she told me that her father had commuted my sentence to time served.
As a felon, depending on where you live, you may or may not have the right to vote. You don't have the right to have a firearm, things like that. If you have a pardon, it's like it never happened and all those rights are restored. It's
extremely rare. Right now, there's 17,400 petitions sitting at the Office of Pardon Attorney filed by there's about 130,000 federal prisoners right now. All those petitions are sitting there, and I think it's a safe bet that way less than 1% of them will ever be granted.
Clemency and a commutation of sentence are the same thing. So what that means is they've wiped out your sentence or reduced your sentence in some cases.
Clemency is a power only held by the president. And to be honest, I received my clemency because of my connections, which does fill me with guilt.
Craig has been working hard since he got out. A lot of prisoners say that they're going to reach back in after they get out, and it never happens.
Remember, most of the people in prisons are not lifers like me. Most of them will be released to the society. And many of them come to me, the convictions date all the way back to the 1970s and 1980s. Americans don't even really have an awareness of what's going on in our criminal justice system.
We have to admit we got this wrong, and it should have never been illegal in the first place, so let's fix it.
After someone's sentence is served, courts can clear their criminal record. That's called expungement. But some advocates say not enough ex-prisoners know about this option for starting over.
What an expungement does is it's a legal proceeding that goes back to the court that convicted the person, and they just erase all the records.
I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all here today to our Record Expungement Clinic and Community Career Fair.
Nothing's automatic when it comes to government, so we started hosting these clinics so that we could take down the barriers for folks.
If someone has a felony, you can't just go work in a hospital or you can't go work in a healthcare facility. If you get a waiver and expungement, that can take your earning potential from $15 to $32 to $45, which can be life-changing for your family.
It's going to take 6 or 8 months because courts are slow. That it's going to open up a lot of doors to them that were not, previously available to them.
Employment, housing, voter rights, student loans. There's so many that, again, stop folks from really having upward mobility in their communities. We look at the root of what's causing all this and how we can, assist in fixing these problems. It all goes back to expungement and clearing those records.
This being an underserved area of the Chicago area, we go into that area and the people are made aware that this expungement clinic is available. And what they'll do is they'll come to me and I'll sit down with them and go over what convictions they have and fill out all the paperwork necessary for a lawyer to represent them to the court, to convince the court to erase their conviction. How long ago was your sentence over?
2015.
Okay, so it's been 7 years.
7 years.
And you're still getting effects of it? You've been denied jobs you applied for because of it?
Yes, sir.
Like what kind of jobs?
You can't get into anything federal. It holds you back from a lot of good things that you can get done. So I'm trying to get that off my record so I can move on with my life.
I'm still actually working on trying to clear myself of a felony in which I obtained in 1994. Wow. And the difficult part with that is, for some odd reason, it's hard to get rid of these felony convictions. You know, that conviction was for possession of a stolen motor vehicle.
So there was nobody hurt?
Nobody hurt. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't savagely beat anyone. No domestic terrorism. You know, just a simple possession of a motor vehicle.
Wow. And that one you're still struggling
I'm still struggling to get that cleared, and it's a shame.
We're all human, so I meet people where they are and let them know that it's okay. We can talk about it, especially when it comes to resume and interviewing skills, because you can get them prepared, but they got to go the rest of the way. And a lot of that is building up confidence within that person.
More people need to understand that there are these services available and they should take advantage of them.
If you've been out of the workforce for a long time, we will help you get started, how to interview, everything to get you back. The success rate is actually very good as long as you are committed to the process. Right now is a great time to look for jobs. Everyone's hiring.
That pandemic really shattered everything. You lost a lot of drivers. They had drug driving. They had a lapse in their driver's license. The state will cover that, you know, to say, hey, okay, we send a waiver.
A lot of times people say, well, I can't find work because I have a background. There are lots of people that will work with you, and definitely companies that have forgiveness.
I employ a lot of folks from those communities that have been in prison, that were ex-gang members, gang leaders, and it's real important that they're relatable to that community, because that's the only way that folks will come out to events like this.
So me now today is being an example for the youth. You know, actions speak louder than words. Me getting caught up into that gang life, into that criminality, you know, it all starts with poverty, broken home, dysfunctional family, not having that role model. You see what I'm saying, in your life?
I decided that being broke and homeless on the street was better than being rich in prison. So I made my mind up that going back into the game was not an option for me at all. We have to get in the mindset of working hard. You know, hard work pays off. Give a little more, because when you give a little more, you're gonna get a little more. And you look up a year or two down the road, and then people be wondering, how did you get to where you at?
Getting this record off of you, what differences will it make in your life?
Well, it would take a huge burden off of me. You know, I am not the individual I was some 30 years ago.
What are your plans, you know, once you're reinstated? You know, I mean, what's your first step?
Honestly, if they do expunge it and seal it, my first thing is I'm gonna go celebrate. Because it'll finally be off my record.
Still to come, the health issues behind menstruation affect more people than you might think. You'll hear the perspective of a transgender person just ahead. We're glad you're spending part of your Labor Day with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Reproductive rights and contraception are a growing concern now that Roe v. Wade is overturned. But these issues affect people across the spectrum of gender identity. Fair warning, some of what you're about to hear might be triggering, but it is worth considering what menstrual health means for transgender and gender non-binary people. Here's NBC's Maura Barrett.
I think we have a lot of work to do in the broader context to understand that just because you have a uterus and just because that uterus bleeds says nothing about your identity as a person.
Menstruation. It's when a person's uterus sheds its lining, causing menstrual blood and tissue to flow out of the uterus every month. Billions of people experience this across the globe and across the gender spectrum, meaning it's not just women who menstruate. Dr. Jean DeHaan is an OBGYN in Portland that focuses on LGBTQ health and trans care. They are transmasculine, non-binary.
When I was 11, I started bleeding, and I thought I was dying. I remember one of my mom's friends was like, "Oh, you're a woman now." And I was so destroyed that I went into our laundry room and I would not come out for the rest of the time that person was there visiting me.
Dr. DeHaan says they, like many others, experienced gender dysphoria. It's the feeling of discomfort or distress that might occur in people whose gender identity differs from their sex assigned at birth.
For some people, it's incredibly dysphoric and it is not acceptable. And for some people, they want to bleed, or some people are attempting pregnancy or, have a relationship with their cycle that they value. So you cannot assume that someone doesn't want to bleed or has dysphoria around their cycle or around their pelvic organs based on their identity. You have to talk to them about it.
Dr. DeHaan says it's not a commonly broached subject, even in the trans and non-binary communities. And that's because everyone's relationship with menstruation is different. We spoke with trans model and activist Kenny Ethan Jones about his individual experience.
And I was 15 when I experienced my first period. And I hated it. It was just, it gives me like weird heebie-jeebie feelings. Periods were the number one thing that made me feel so disconnected from my own body and just fragile in my identity because, that narrative back then wasn't, boys didn't have periods. I felt like my body was betraying me. And so spending, your life every month coming knocking a period and having to relive that, it was quite traumatizing, to be honest.
Gender-affirming care, including taking testosterone, changed Kenny's life when he was 16 years old.
I lost Kenny when I started to have my periods, and when I started to dislike my body, I just became a shell of myself. And so I was really stepping into Kenny 2.0. At 16, I was like, I'm Kenny now.
And in most cases, Dr. DeHaan says,
there's no danger in stopping a period if you have an IUD or you're on continuous birth control pills or some other hormonal, testosterone, some other hormonal modification of your body to make you not bleed. That's totally okay.
And while menstruation alone can cause dysphoria, Dr. DeHaan says public bathrooms add another layer of stress. And with new anti-trans bathroom laws in states like Oklahoma and Alabama, trans students are being forced to use bathrooms they aren't comfortable with.
I mean, you add bleeding onto that, it's almost impossible. So I know that people will be forced to make different decisions about where they can go based on the availability of gender-neutral bathrooms or based on whether or not they're bleeding. Are they bleeding heavily? Are they going to have to access a bathroom regularly? Are they going to need additional products?
Period products are often touted as feminine hygiene products. Kenny told us how distressing it was for him to buy these products as a teenager.
I would travel to shops that were outside of my area because I seen buying period products as outing myself as trans. I hated every moment of it. I felt like I shouldn't be buying this because I didn't feel like I should be using them because inclusive language wasn't used. I felt disconnected from my body. I felt disconnected from my identity.
Not everybody who menstruates is a woman. And so I feel like the dialogue is becoming more inclusive, but the marketing certainly isn't.
Playtech Sport. Play on.
In 2018, Pink Parcel's I'm On campaign sought to challenge the stigma around periods and portray a diverse group of people who menstruate. And after careful consideration, Kenny agreed to be part of the campaign.
A lot of the comments under the article and the campaign was very much from cis women being like, I had never considered this, but oh my God, I can't now unsee it. I had a few trans men message me and basically they were upset with me. Again, for aligning our bodies more with women's bodies. I chose to be a part of that campaign was because it felt freeing. The idea of taking something that I was so ashamed of and caused such a disconnect in my body and made me feel fractured in my identity, owning up to that and being like, I'm going to feel powerful in this situation and I'm going to say that this is just a bodily function that I experience and it doesn't determine my gender. I determine my gender.
And according to Dr. DeHaan, transgender feminine individuals can experience what they call a, quote, cyclical hormonal milieu.
Some people are on testosterone blockers or estrogen or progesterone or a combination of all the above. And so depending on where they are in terms of their delivery of medication or their dosing, they might feel some hormonal fluctuations. And that is what a cycle is hormonal fluctuation.
Dr. DeHaan says understanding the chronic stressors that impede on a transgender person's life is crucial.
We're at higher risk of depression, anxiety, suicide, unstable housing, inadequate access to jobs, all of those things. So when you're thinking about addressing gender-affirming care, you have to be trauma-informed in your approach. You have to understand that daily chronic stress and the buildup of that over somebody's lifetime. It's very significant for a lot of us.
Using inclusive language would have made all of the difference for little Kenny. I would just like trans people to be thought about. I think we've spent so long not being thought about and being, on the back burner of these discussions. But, periods affect us just as much as they do cis women.
That was NBC's Maura Barrett reporting. Kids across the country are heading back to school. Many of them will be part of active shooter drills, but some of the guidance on what to do in an emergency is changing. We'll take a closer look when we come back. Kids are heading back to school across the country, but the increase in gun violence on campuses has more districts holding active shooter trainings for teachers and students. NBC national security correspondent Ken Delanian has more on that. Hey, Ken.
Joshua, most schools run some sort of active shooter drills, but after May's massacre of fourth graders and their teachers at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, some experts worry that many schools are not offering the right training. They want students and teachers to be given options beyond simply hiding in classrooms. And they say active shooter protocols should be as ingrained as fire drills. Here's more.
Safety, safety, safety! This is how some school officials are preparing for a day they hope will never come. School shootings have become a fixture of American society. A federal database counts 603 incidents of gun violence on campus from 2018 through 2021, 155 so far this year. In response, most schools have implemented so-called active shooter drills. But after a lone gunman took 21 lives in May at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas,
get under the table and act like you're asleep.
Some experts have raised the question, are kids and teachers being taught the wrong lessons?
It's clear that the children in that school were pretty much taught lockdown. And I very much wish that we would begin as a society to accept that we can trust that our children know how to run, because children who have run from school shootings have survived.
Catherine Schweit ran the FBI's active shooter program, which endorses a more proactive response to a school shooter, shorthanded as run, hide, fight. NBC News got access to one version of that style of training, a program known as ALICE, offered by a private company, Navigate 360. After Uvalde, the Phoenix Suns charity paid to train a group of Phoenix teachers who could then train other teachers and students.
Everybody remembers learning to stop, drop, and roll. ALICE training wants alert, lockdown, inform, counter, and evacuate to become just as ingrained.
When's the last time a kid died in a school fire in the United States of America? Firefighters don't answer that question. 58, December 1st, 1958, right? So what have we done? We trained kids and teachers what to do when the fire alarm goes off, when they smell smoke, when they see fire.
Brandon Rohn, a former police officer, led the training.
ALICE is very simple in concept, ladies and gentlemen. It really comes down to two foundational principles. Remove yourself from the dangerous location or render that location no longer dangerous.
One educator has chosen to play the shooter, told to enter the classroom with a Nerf gun.
I know I'm not going to die today, but it felt like I was in a real situation, and so it's just so cool to actually practice this with a fake gun, and it really just puts it all into perspective.
ALICE also teaches educators how to counter a shooter, which can mean anything from yelling to throwing a stapler.
Counter is not fighting. Counter is a physiological, psychological interruption of thought. Because we would never advocate an unarmed person fight an armed person. What does counter look like? Counter is two techniques: distraction and control.
And Brandon, do you worry at all that by teaching counter, even though you say it's not about fighting back, it's going to encourage people to put themselves in harm's way and actually get somebody killed?
I don't, and the reason why I don't is because we teach the science behind the counter and how we're able to use things like noise, movement, distance, and distraction to overload one's ability to process information, and basically you are causing that physiological, psychological interruption of thought.
Some critics say ALICE training is the wrong approach. Mike Dorn is the executive director of Safe Haven International, a nonprofit focused on school safety.
None of them are tested with all hazard scenarios, because if you just test like ALICE, they test only with active shooter scenarios. Active shooter deaths are one of the rarest types of homicide on school campuses. They account for about 8% of fatalities. So what you end up doing with these type programs, when you focus on active shooter, you condition people, again, that anybody with a gun must be an active shooter.
Navigate 360 officials reject those criticisms. And do you believe that this training actually would minimize or reduce injuries and fatalities?
I 100% believe that. In fact, we have seen that in several events in K-12 space across the country, where trained students and faculty and staff deployed the training in a time of need and was able to increase their survivability.
They point to an incident last year when 4 students were killed in a shooting at Oxford High School in Oakland County, Michigan. Another 8 were injured. Oakland County Sheriff Mike Bouchard credits ALICE training with preventing more casualties.
Our liaison taught them in ALICE. Those practices were used and they saved lives.
One of the challenges when it comes to the concept of dealing with a violent offender is that you'll freeze. And if you empower people to think through what they could do or what they might do and what they may have to confront, they will be more inclined to skip the freeze part and move to the action part. And that's what all of this training teaches civilians.
Do you feel empowered? I mean, it must be pretty helpless as a teacher when you see something like Uvalde and you're just like, what happens if that occurs in our school? Do you feel better about the situation now?
Oh, yes. I definitely feel better, like a little bit more prepared than just having the kids turn the lights off, lock the door, and go in a corner.
Having gone through all of them, it really just like equips you with the strategies and the tools to know what you can do, and has a ton of resources to access in the event of an emergency. And so coming out of today, I feel like way more prepared, even if it was just a one-day training, to go back to my school and kind of give them some of these resources, and then even just for myself if an emergency arises.
Joshua, former FBI official Catherine Schweit told us she fears that most school districts are still using an outdated form of active shooter protocol that instructs students to hunker down under all circumstances. That's sometimes the right thing to do, she and other experts say, but there are other times when the best way to survive is to try to escape the gunman, and in the most dire circumstances, to try to counter the shooter. Joshua?
All right, thank you, Ken. That's NBC's Ken Delanian reporting. Still ahead, best-selling author Brené Brown with advice on helping people connect. Reading emotions is a good place to start, and we may not be as good at that as we think. More from her book, Atlas of the Heart, is just ahead. Stay close. Now Tonight is a news program with a very specific mission. We are here to foster connection by leading America's national conversation. Our job is to help you engage deeply on our most meaningful and challenging issues. That's not easy to do. So we discussed it with someone who has connected with millions of people and helped them connect to each other. The credentials of Brené Brown include 2 professorships, 5 New York Times bestsellers, and lectures on Netflix and on HBO Max. Her TEDx talk is one of the most viewed ever, but her latest best-selling book, Atlas of the Heart, aims to help people cultivate meaningful connections. We sat down with her when the book came out. Brené Brown, welcome.
I am so excited to be here. I like your digs.
Thank you very much. Dug them myself. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm anxiously optimistic.
You chose those words very carefully.
Always.
Which is very much at the heart of the book. I love the book. I read the book. I read the book.
You read the book. You posted. You like that's a serious. I'm a serious post-it note person in books, but that's heavy competition.
I mean, this is a heavy book. This is a lot of book, and it's a great book. I got a lot out of it. It builds on your other work. I wanted to start with something, though, near the end. You write, I no longer believe that we can recognize emotion in other people, regardless of how well we understand human emotion and experience or how much language we have. That goes very much to the heart, I think, of why you wrote this book. But why do you say we cannot recognize emotion in other people?
Emotions present in a way that makes it almost impossible. If I saw you and you had your head in your hands and you were crying, and I assumed that you were sad, it might not be sad. It could be grief, it could be anger, it could be disappointment, it could be shame, it could be, and so I think we make a mistake thinking that we can read it in other people. The call is much more complex and much more courageous, which is what's going on. It's about being stewards of people's stories. It's about asking you what's going on, believing you when you tell me. And so I think if we want to find our way back to ourselves and to each other, we have to be very curious about stories. Because, you know, if emotion is biology, it's biography, it's behavior and backstory.
Biology, biography, behavior, and backstory.
So biology, we feel our emotions. So emotion is about what happens in our bodies, which is really hard in a world full of disembodied people that have no connection to their bodies. Secondly, it's biography. What did you learn from your family? What did you learn from culture about that emotion and about, is it okay to feel it? It's behavior, how we show up, but it's also backstory. I mean, one of the things that I do is I use a lot of film when I teach.
Yeah.
And I would show a really emotional film clip from a movie and say, what does this look like? And people would guess 20 different things. And I would say, you're right. All of those emotions can show up like this behaviorally. So what do we need to do to better understand what this person is actually experiencing? And the answer is ask. We need to get curious about people's stories.
A lot of what you write about in the book is directly related to what we're seeing in the world today, including one of the emotions I think we deal with a lot, which is schadenfreude.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a lot of schadenfreude going on these days. Lots and lots and lots. And I think a lot of people feel like because I hate the same people, I like you. You refer to that as common enemy intimacy.
Yeah.
And you also write that that is a counterfeit kind of connection, a counterfeit kind of belonging. What is it that we're missing out on if we agree, oh yeah, those people are the ones who are screwing the world up?
God, it feels so good, though. Let me just pause for a second and say, oh, my God, that feels so good.
Yeah.
When, like, I meet you and, like, we talk for a few minutes, we're checking each other out, we're not sure, and then you make kind of a caustic comment about a group of people, and I'm like, oh, my God, I hate the same people. We are best friends.
And we're not talking about, like, Yankees, Red Sox. We're talking about something like political.
Yeah, we're talking about vaccines. We're talking about politics, values-based things. The thing is that if all we have in common is that we hate the same people, doesn't give us very much to build a relationship on. And the moment I start to think, you know, well, whoa, you need to take it easy now because you're actually talking about my dad. Or, you know, I don't know that you know, then things change. And so any kind of connection that's formed on belittling or hate or judgment is shaky ground. And the schadenfreude, you know, schadenfreude is simply experiencing joy when others experience misfortune. So you've got a commentator who is very anti-vaccine, and all of a sudden, this person's sick. And you see the world rejoicing, like, you know.
Served him right.
Served him right. And I can fall into that camp sometimes, except then I have to deal with how does that reconcile with my values and my faith that I'm feeling like this.
Well, you also give us, one of the other interesting things about the book is that you give us some alternative words. Words I'd never heard of, like Shoy, S-H-O-Y, intentionally sharing the joy of someone relating a success story by showing interest and asking follow-up questions.
And that's one of the greatest forms of connection. Yeah, is to say, like, if you share something like, look at my new studio. And I'm
Fabulous.
like, oh my God, I'm so excited for you.
Yeah.
How are you feeling? That's real connection.
You also define connection there, and you define connection as a kind of energy.
It is. It's an energy that exists between people when people feel heard and seen and valued. And when that hearing and seeing and valuing is reciprocal.
One of the other emotions that you dig into that we see a lot of, understandably, today is anger. And I love the way, there are a lot of great illustrations in this book. And one of them is an illustration on page 222 about what might be behind anger. And I like the nuance of this. I just think for a person who's not familiar with your work, it'd be easy to look at this and go, well, yeah, it'd be easier to know what's behind the anger if they would calm down. Like, why is it my job to be, a Sherpa for their emotions rather than them taking the responsibility to just chill?
No, I mean, I think it's very difficult. And I think, anger can be an amazing catalyst for change. If we look at activism and organizing, anger can be a great catalyst for change. But if you don't use it to catalyze something, it's a terrible, terrible lifetime companion. I mean, physically, emotionally, spiritually, just eats us alive. I think anger, in many ways, is more, certainly today, more acceptable than other emotions. And so I think, sometimes when I get angry and it's on top of, it's hiding something else, I often think about this thing that my therapist said one time. She said, it's really hard for me to hear you because of how you're acting right now.
Yeah, it literally drowns everything else out.
Yeah, the behavior drowns out the sound.
I want to come back to activism in a second, but to that end, you introduced a term that I had never heard before. It's on page 197. The term is flooding. You define it the way the Gottman Institute defines it, which is a sensation of feeling psychologically and physically overwhelmed during conflict, making it virtually impossible to have a productive problem-solving discussion. And you refer to having an argument with your husband, Steve, in which you write, at some point I realized that stopping, meaning stopping the argument, scared me. Fighting together seemed less painful than hurting alone. If that doesn't describe some of what's going on in our world today, that we're just kind of like flooding and flooding and flooding and flooding, and we're drowning in our own flooding.
I mean, I think we're drowning. I mean, that's so beautifully put. I think we're drowning in our own flooding. And I think flooding is when my nervous system is shutting down because of the level of conflict right now. Like, I'm just shutting down on the inside.
Atlas of the Heart is a guide to handling emotions, including one that comes up a lot in today's politics: narcissism. We'll wrap up our conversation with Brené Brown before we go. Time for part 2 of our conversation with Brené Brown. We discuss how shame relates to activism and what gives her hope for the future. But let's pick things up with an emotion that can be difficult to take on. One of the other emotions that we've talked about a lot, especially during and after the Trump administration, is narcissism.
Yeah.
And you describe narcissism as the shame-based fear of being ordinary. But you also warn that shame, and you've said this in all your books, and it is true, that shame is never a productive way to inspire change. And indeed, if someone has a shame-based fear of being ordinary, shaming them doesn't make them shift. It just makes things worse.
Yeah.
So then how do we deal with narcissists?
We deal with it by accountability through boundaries. You know, in a family relationship or an intimate relationship, we set boundaries. Culturally, if we have, let's say, a leader who's shows up very narcissistically, behaviorally, we hold people accountable, but we're not good at doing that. What we're good at doing, we're like accountability. That seems like a lot of work. Let me just shame you, berate you, call you terrible names, tweet at you, and then I'm going to go about my business. Nothing changes. The world's just got more crap and more vitriol, but nothing changes.
Go deeper into that, because on page 149 you write, I know we all have deeply passionate political and cultural beliefs, but shame and humiliation will never be effective social justice tools. They are tools of oppression. I hear where you're coming from, but then I think, well, gay men shamed the NIH into doing research on AIDS. The Boston Globe shamed the Catholic Church into dealing with rampant sexual abuse among priests. You know, the Pentagon Papers shamed Nixon out of office. Like, aren't there certain circumstances where the nicer, more thoughtful, empathetic approach isn't necessarily the way to get something done?
I would have said that was accountability.
Not shame.
The thing is, accountability takes a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of effort. Name calling takes very little. It feels really great. But I would say every example you just gave is accountability. Now, let me say this because it's really important. If I say something racist and you say, hey, Brené, I need to let you know how that just landed, and you hold me accountable for it, and then I feel shame, that's not shaming me. That's holding me accountable. You're responsible for the accountability, but you're not responsible for my emotional reaction to it. So but that's not shaming me. Shaming me is you're a piece of crap, you're a horrible person, you know, that's shame.
And just to clarify, you've defined shame versus guilt, which I think is key. Guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am something bad.
Yeah, and we see in the research that guilt's a very socially adaptive emotion. It drives amends, apologies, behavior change, accountability. Shame drives double downing, rationalizing, blaming.
And one of the things that I think is useful is just the way that we do what you call story stewardship, where we hold space for other people to share what they know about their lived experiences and then learn from that. But you also warn about what you call near enemies, which are things that look like the helpful behavior, but they're like 5 degrees off and they actually make things worse. One of the things you talk about is the nature of help, and how sometimes when we think we're helping, we're actually doing what you call controlling the path. I love this quote from Anne Lamott, who said that help is the sunny side of control.
Oh my God, it's so true.
I love that, and it kind of makes me go, ooh.
Yeah, no, it's painful.
So am I actually helping? Like, how do we know that we're being useful rather than just being helpful in terms of understanding where someone else is coming from?
I always have to ask myself, am I being other-focused right now or self-focused? And if am I trying to control a situation for my own comfort? You know, and so even if it's with my kids and they're like, oh my God, this hard thing happened at school, am I jumping in and advice giving and telling them what to do, or am I just being with them in the emotion and being connected to them? You know, and sometimes I'll say, what does help look like for me right now? Do you want some ideas? No, I just want you to hear what happened. And so I think it's about the intention. Am I trying to leverage emotion? Am I trying to make things more comfortable for me? Or am I really trying to be with someone else in their issue?
Not to walk in their shoes, but to see what it's like in their shoes.
To listen to their story about what it's like to be in their shoes and to believe them. And that's where we lose empathy. Because you tell me the story of something that happened to you in your shoes, and I'm like, no, come on. Joshua, it couldn't have been that bad. I think, do you think you're being sensitive? So here I am, white, straight, Texan. What you explained to me would not have been my experience. So rather than building narrative trust with you, I'm taking over the narrative because I don't believe you because what you explained is not my lived experience. And that's what we do every single day.
One last thing before I have to let you go. I have tremendous hope for humanity. People will sometimes say, why are you such an optimist? I'm like, I think of myself more as an explorer, like the guy who gets on the Enterprise knowing he might not get back, but saying someone's got to go, so it's going to be me. So I feel good about the work we're going to do. What gives you hope that we're going to find ways back to one another, that we're going to find ways to reconnect, that we're going to find ways to kind of get out of our own way and get results. Get results for the things that we say we want. What gives you hope?
Love. Love gives me hope. I think that, Bell Hooks talks about lovelessness as this, not just a micro issue, but a macro issue in culture and community. And I think we've been going through a time of great lovelessness. And I think people are starting to feel the impact of living in lovelessness. And so what I'm hopeful about, I think, is the drive to experience love for self, for others, for our communities, is so part of our DNA. I'm hopeful that our yearning for love will teach us to be gentler with ourselves and each other.
The book is called Atlas of the Heart, Mapping Meaningful Connection and the Language of Human Experience. You know who I love?
Who?
I love you, Brené Brown.
I love you back.
You are fabulous. I really appreciate you making time for us on our debut week. This is fabulous.
This is great. So congratulations, and I'm so grateful for the conversations you're going to bring here.
Yes.
We need them.
Now, you and I have only got like 10 hours and 40 minutes of conversations left to go, but we'll
okay. That's like 20 episodes.
Good. Our first 4 weeks are booked. Brené Brown, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And thank you for making time for us. Remember, you can always send us your thoughts and questions on anything we discuss tonight or any night. We're at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. You can leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. So until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.